Hello, welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by Josh from WhoScored and my hero, Jonathan Wilson. With Todd Bowley saying earlier in the week that there should be a Premier League All-Star game. Josh, you've compiled a team, or two teams, North v South.
North v South, as we were just saying off air, the Midlands is a bit of a grey area, but thankfully none of the players are good enough to even be in the team, so sort of skirted around that.
There's literally not one team in the Midlands that's any good at the moment, except for like Mansfield.
Yeah. I'm not sure they would be getting into these teams, but yeah, I'm not even sure that these are the sort of teams that Todd Bowley had in mind, to be honest, but we've used it based on WhoScored ratings in the Premier League this season. I'll start with the North. We've got Nick Pope in goal, and then we've got a back four of Kieran Trippier, Fabian Schär, Pascal Struijk of Leeds, and João Cancelo at left back. The midfield four is Mohamed Salah, who obviously has been a bit very under par for his usual standards, and his rating is the lowest of all of the forward players. But he, surprisingly, actually, he's been the most creative player in Europe's top 5 leagues, which was a bit of a surprise. Most key passes. And then in midfield, we've got Joelinton and Kevin De Bruyne and Alan St-Maximin. And then up front, we've got Erling Haaland, joined by Roberto Firmino, who's propped up by a couple of really strong games that he had earlier in the season. And then the team of the South, there's only 2 Chelsea players, so Todd Bowley might not be too impressed with that. But we've got Bernd Leno in goal, Reece James at right back, Joachim Andersen and Thiago Silva as the centre-backs, Zinchenko at left back. And then into midfield, we've got Wolf Zaha, Odegaard, Højbjerg and Martinelli. Then up front, we've got Ivan Toney, who we'll come on to shortly, and Alexander Mitrovic. So definitely never going to see those teams play. Probably never going to see the All-Star game either.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the likes of Fabian Schär weren't who Todd Bowley had in mind. He said, I hope the Premier League takes a little bit of a lesson from American sports and really starts to figure out why there isn't an All-Star game. Jonathan, have you figured out why there isn't one?
Yeah, because it's nonsense.
I thought you might say that.
It's just a stupid idea by a man who increasingly becomes clear has no idea how football works. I mean, quite apart from the practicalities of it, when you'd fit it in the calendar, the fact nobody would care about it, it'd be played at half pace because nobody would want to get injured. The fact that teams wouldn't want to give up their players to it. You just can't go and pick 11 players. That's not how football is. The team works. The team is what matters in football. So in US sports, where they're much more individualistic, where you have, you need your first base bloke, you need your second base bloke. Yeah, okay, you go and pick the first baseman, and he doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on the players around him. In football, you've got to pick a back four that will work together. You've got to pick a midfield that will work together. You've got to pick a midfield that will work with that defence. Yeah, the level of quality, if you put this game on, just 11 blokes who've never met each other, would be disgusting. It just would be terrible. It'd be an awful spectacle. And this would, if I was a Chelsea fan, this would really worry me. Yeah, if it's the kind of thing that Todd Bowley was WhatsApping to Thomas Tuchel, no wonder he got crotchety. Like I'm crotchety having to talk about this now, and I'm getting paid for. I suppose Thomas Tuchel was getting paid for it. To be fair, I suspect rather more than I'm getting. But
be close.
It just shows a complete lack of understanding of how to put a football team together, and I think that was the worry all the way through. That Bowley. He buys big names. That's what he's done at his US franchises, and him trying to sign Ronaldo and being told by Tuchel that just doesn't work because he doesn't press. He seems to have no understanding that a famous bloke who's good at one aspect of a game or used to be good at one aspect of a game doesn't necessarily fit the system of a manager. So it's just a complete lack of just a failure to understand football on a practical level and a conceptual level, and as I say, as a Chelsea fan, that would terrify me.
Josh, you should probably plug these WhoScored ratings to this concept to Todd Bowley, because he'll probably pay WhoScored a hell of a lot of money to put these two teams together. I would imagine it's really cool, isn't it, when people come over who are new to the game and make suggestions like this?
Yeah. He might entertain the idea that we've got ratings, but then he probably would be a bit confused by the players that we've just given him. We probably would shut the door quite quickly on that. I think if there was to be any sort of like fantasy games, I think I'd rather just see like a 5-a-side tournament. I think that would be more entertaining than watching them playing a game that they don't really want to play on an 11-a-side pitch. But yeah, I imagine that this isn't something. I don't know. Maybe it will replace the Community Shield. I don't know, but I doubt this will ever happen.
But why would you do that? Pretty much every country in the world has a Super Cup equivalent. I mean, I'm no great fan of the Community Shield. Yeah, I watch it because it's normal. It's coming after a month when I haven't been able to watch football. But it never, Liverpool battered Man City in that game this year, and look at where they are now. It tells you nothing. It's a pointless game anyway because it's a game people don't want to play in. But at least those are teams who play together regularly and they can use it as a training exercise rather than just random collection of blokes being dumped together.
I think what's so good about the NBA's version as well, it's not great, but what is entertaining is that they do they do things you don't normally see on a basketball court very often. But I just don't see where that would come into football. It's not like they can just do like a slam dunk contest equivalent in the Premier League.
Crossbar challenge.
Crossbar challenge, yeah.
But that would actually make more sense. I mean, it'd still be terrible. I still wouldn't watch it, and I'd still be appalled by it. But having skills contests, so like the Rumbelow Sprint Challenge, or that thing to see who had the longest throw, or trying to hit the bar from the edge of a D or whatever. At least that would sort of those are they'd be individual things that watching individuals make sense. But football's about the team. It's about the team unit. It's not about the individuals. And I think this is the fascinating tension at the top level of the sport. You've got all these rich idiots who own clubs who don't get that. And then you've got the poor coaches who are trying to explain this to them. In many cases getting no. And that's why City are so dominant, because they have a board who seems to understand what Guardiola's doing. And why Liverpool, up until recently, have been so good, that they have a board that understands that you need a structure that functions, not just loads of famous people.
Well, we've said that something's nonsense and then we've spent 10 minutes talking about it, so we should probably move on to the Premier League weekend. A few games have fallen by the wayside, but we do have some Premier League football this weekend. The first game that we're going to look at is Brentford against Arsenal. And Jonathan, the England squad's announced later on in the week. We're recording Wednesday morning, so the England squad is Thursday, I think. Ivan Toney, could he have done any more to get in? Should he be in your opinion?
Yeah, I think he should be in. He scored, 5 goals this season? I think the quality of this hat-trick against Leeds, a penalty, but being able to take a penalty well is a big thing in national football. But the free kick and then the third goal were sensational goals. I think his hold-up play is really good. I think last season, a lot was made of how Brentford improved when Christian Eriksen came into the side. Well, Christian Eriksen's debut was also the day that Ivan Toney came back from injury. So those two things went together. And I'm not saying Eriksen wasn't important, but Toney's return was also important. And so as Harry Kane's backup, I'm not really sure who the other candidates are. Tammy Abraham, maybe. I think he's only scored once so far this season for Roma. That's not necessarily a guide to how well he's playing. But it's not that he's posting massive numbers to knock down the door. But you look at people like Ollie Watkins, Callum Wilson, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Patrick Bamford. They're either out of form or struggling with injuries. So I think really, if you're looking for Kane's backup, it's got to be Toney or Abraham at the minute. And maybe I'm saying this because I see much more of the Premier League going to do with Serie A, but Toney would seem to me the man in form right now.
It's a funny position, isn't it, being the striker? Because obviously in competition football, Harry Kane's going to play every single game, maybe rested for the final group game if England are through already. But it's a funny position where it probably for most of the tournament, it doesn't really matter who that striker is, but on merit, you'd have to say Ivan Toney, it has to be him. I mean, he can't do much more. Like Jonathan said, the 2 of the goals he scored against Leeds were just unbelievable, and he's sort of developed into such a well-rounded striker now at Brentford. And like, this is off topic, but I would love to see Manchester United sign him at the end of the season. I think he could play that Sebastian Haller role that Ten Hag had at Ajax really well. So I'd like to see that sort of happen at the end of the season. But just on England, I looked into the WhoScored ratings again to see who the best rated 11 was, and see if Toney come into it. And Toney is actually the best rated English player in Europe's top 5 leagues this season. And I'll just run through the team in general ahead of tomorrow's squad announcements. So we've got Nick Pope in goal. He edges out Pickford by just 0.01 rating points, so nothing really to split them. But Pickford's going to be injured anyway, so Nick Pope has a chance to maybe put a stake down to play. The defence is interesting. We've gone for a 3-5-2 formation, I should say. I think Southgate may well revert back to that after a pretty difficult last international period of matches. The defence is interesting. We won't get too bogged down by the players and stuff, but we've got Reece James as a third centre back, and then we've got Chris Smalling and James Tarkowski in there, 2 players that definitely won't be on the radar, I imagine, or maybe Smalling, but I think that just sort of sums up the problems for England at the back at the moment. You've got Stones, who Guardiola said isn't even reliable to stay fit anymore. Harry Maguire obviously isn't playing for his club. Joe Gomez has had a really tough start to the season. So there's obviously problems there. Eric Dier could come back into it, as we'll discuss later on in the show, about his sort of recent form. And then into the midfield, I've sort of left back is another issue because Luke Shaw and Chilwell aren't playing. So we've got Trippier there. And then that's opened up the right-hand side. And we've put Bukayo Saka as the right wing-back, which he hasn't played that position for a while, but he has in the past. So I'm going to accept that. And then central midfield, we've got Jude Bellingham and James Ward-Prowse. Again, Declan Rice has a bit of a slow start to the season. Henderson hasn't been great. So maybe we don't have the depth there that it seemed like we did a year or so ago. And then we've got Phil Foden playing behind Harry Kane and Ivan Toney. So yeah, based on form, Toney is the top-rated English player and would actually, if there's only be one striker, then he would actually pip Kane to that spot. But obviously, Kane's the captain and will always play. But yeah, Toney definitely in the England squad in my mind. But we'll see, I guess, tomorrow if that comes true.
Jonathan, the back 5. Talk to me through that back 5. Can we at least put Saka and Trippier the other way around in the back 5?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. But I just think that it just like obviously the defense isn't ideal with Smalling and Tarkowski, but I do think that sort of accurately reflects the problem that Southgate has at the moment, in that his like go-to centre backs are either not playing well or not fit. So not the defence I would like, but I think it does accurately reflect the sort of the problems at the moment.
Thoughts, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think he will go back to a back 3. I would assume it'll be Walker and Trippier as the wing backs. I then think Reece James is playing well. Is that's fine on the right side of the 3. Eric Dier, I think, is playing really well. Looks reborn under Conte, and I always thought he was one of those players who it was easy for people to pick on him. I never thought his form dropped off that far. So he plays in the middle, and then I guess Maguire carries on the left. And what you can say is that no matter how badly he's been playing for Manchester United, with the exception of that game against Denmark when he got sent off, which was shortly after his arrest and everything, he's always been okay for England. I think in a back 3, he probably enjoys that a bit more. That what he's still good at is winning headers, and he's actually quite good at bringing the ball out and using his left foot. So having Eric Dier controlling him and directing him, I think that's fine. So obviously there's concerns. I think there's always been concerns about the heart of the defence. I don't think that as a 3 looks that bad at the moment. I'm not that worried by it.
Let's go back to Ivan Toney then, because Jonathan, it doesn't feel a very Southgate thing to do to have someone come into a squad in September and then with the World Cup squad being announced in November. That doesn't feel like a long enough turnaround for Gareth Southgate to have someone in his squad for a tournament for me. I could be wrong, but that's just the impression I get.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally he wouldn't have done that, but ideally he wouldn't have a World Cup in November. I mean, that's what's caused the problem. I just, because there's no other candidates. I'm sure he would love it if Ollie Watkins was playing brilliantly and he could just carry on with that, but he's not. So, and if he doesn't pick Toney here, I just think it looks really weird. And then you end up maybe bringing him into the World Cup having not tested him and not tried him. So I think there's also a question of how many sort of out-and-out strikers do you take? In a 26-man squad, do you take 3? Because that means you have the option to go 2 proper strikers plus a reserve if one of them gets injured. For maybe, if you're 1-0 down with 20 minutes to go and you want to just sort of lump it a bit longer. I don't know. Or do you think, Sterling can cover there. Foden can play as a false 9. I think my temptation would be to take the 3 just because, if say 2 of them get injured, then you really do have, I think, big problems with the lack of a focal point if you haven't spent years or months practicing with a false 9. So I suspect with it being 26 in the squad, I think probably Kane, Toney and Abraham will go. Now, obviously, if Dominic Calvert-Lewin gets back to fitness and starts scoring loads of goals, maybe that begins to change near the World Cup. But at the moment, that would seem reasonable to me. And then I think you've got to give Toney probably a start in one of these games, or at the very least, sort of lengthy run-outs, just to see if he works in a system where, I think the England striker's role is not straightforward. That it's not just about sticking a number 9 up there, because the way Kane plays is so distinctive, the way he drops deep, and then you need people like Sterling running beyond him, or perhaps Jadon Sancho running beyond him. If that is the way England are going to play, and it has to be with Kane, you probably want to make sure that the backups to him can also play that way.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to the Euros, and he took Kane, Calvert-Lewin, and then I guess Rashford was the kind of the third striker in that, which you could see happening again. So if Southgate goes with the same kind of balance as he did in that 26-man squad for the Euros, I don't think Toney will get in, but I really think he should be in the squad. At the moment, if I was picking a World Cup squad now, he'd be in mine. But I'm just thinking of Gareth Southgate.
Maybe the penalty. Sorry, go on.
All right. No, I'm just thinking of Gareth Southgate, and I feel like he's more likely to go Kane and Tammy because they've been around the squad for however many years since the Euros was on, and then also Rashford's back in form now, so it feels like an easier Southgate thing to put Rashford in. When you say he's back on form, he's scored.
Yeah, he's had a couple of decent games. Yeah, I mean, I still think Rashford's position's really. You're right. Rashford could be that third striker, and he gives the option of coming in off the left as well.
That just feels more Southgate to me.
And he can fill in at right back as he did in the last 3 minutes of the Euros final, slightly weirdly.
And that's what we want from everyone in the England squad. Can you do a duration at right back? If you can, you've probably got a chance of getting in. What were you going to say, Josh?
And maybe I was just going to say, like as you said at the start, maybe that the fact that Toney does have that superb penalty record, maybe that might give him an edge over some of the others. But yeah, I do agree that it would feel a bit unlike Southgate to do it, but hopefully that given the unique circumstances, hopefully he does sort of look at Toney.
He'll be in this squad. I think Tammy Abraham's got a shoulder problem as well, so I think he's a doubt for the squad at the time of filming. So I think he'll be in this squad, but I have doubts over whether he would make it to the full squad for the World Cup, because I just don't think he'll get enough time in these 2 games to prove himself, and it just feels not very Southgate-like at all. But Brentford going well, Josh. They've shown a lot of resilience so far this season, spent a lot of time behind in games, and have always managed to get back in and pick up points. So it's been a positive start for Brentford. That Ericsson loss hasn't really curtailed them. They still feel like they've got that bit of momentum and team spirit. Yeah,
I think the one disappointment for them is that they followed up that 4-0 win over Manchester United with defeat to Fulham in the next game. And I think that's sort of where they are at, I guess, or many teams like that, it's the consistency that they struggle with to follow those highs with another great result. And obviously last weekend was cancelled, but before that they had that massive win over Leeds. So it'll be interesting to see how they sort of respond here. And it was in this game last season, the very first game of the season, where they really battered Arsenal. But obviously Arsenal much improved since then. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of pans out. I do think it will be a really entertaining game.
Martinelli's having a good time on the left-hand side. Saka a little bit quiet for his very high standards, Jonathan, on the right. But Martinelli, not in the Brazil squad. They must have some side going on at the moment if Martinelli and Jesus aren't getting in there. But how impressed have you been by Martinelli's start? Again, he's probably picked up where he left off at the back end of last season.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always known he's got talent. It's just sort of performing it consistently and not getting injured. So the fact he's had a run where he has been fit, I think the way they play suits him. That he's probably got a bit more license to run beyond Gabriel Jesus than Saka does. I think he maybe catches the eye a bit more. I think he's one of those slightly odd players that I this keeps happening and it shouldn't, but I keep on being surprised by how tall he is. He doesn't feel like he should be as tall as he is, and that makes him a threat in the air as well. So I mean, I think it's harsh on Saka to say he hasn't really caught the eye. I think that whole front four, if you include Odegaard.
I'm just reading the script. Just reading the script from Josh.
Yeah, I didn't agree with it when I read the script. I thought, what is this nonsense? Poor Dan having to read out this. That's what I thought. But yeah, I think that front four's worked really well together, and the fact that Smith Rowe's been injured and haven't really noticed, I think tells you how well that group of players is playing together.
Yeah. How tall are you, Jonathan?
5'10".
5'10". I always had you down as taller.
Yeah, a lot of people. I've got a slight stoop, which paradoxically makes me look taller than I am.
Okay, Josh, yeah.
6'4".
6'4". I had you down as smaller. What is this? I always get when people meet me, they always say I'm a lot taller than they thought I was going to be. I'm 6'1". Josh, 6'4", giant.
Towering over you both.
I would have said my guess for Jonathan would have been about 6'3". I don't know the magnitude of the man, the stature of the man within the game. But I just expected him to be tall.
So it's like that sketch with John Cleese, Ronnie Barker, Ronnie Corbett, and I'm a Ronnie Corbett.
No, you're not that small. You're not Ronnie Corbett height. Ronnie Corbett wasn't 5'10".
No, he wasn't. He was, what was he, about 5'5", something like that?
I don't know factually how tall he was, but he definitely was. He was smaller than 5'10". I'm going to say.
No, I mean, he was, but you know the sketch I mean. That was the was sketch.
I know who all three of the people are that you're talking about.
Okay. And then look it up. It's a classic sketch about.
I'll have a look after this. Josh, you've got to obviously defend your bit that you put in the script there.
Yeah,
you've got a reason why you think that Martinelli's doing so well.
I think that it's also the fact that he's started all the games, but I think the impact that Gabriel Jesus has made in that sort of side, I think it has really sort of brought more out of him. I think before they had Lacazette, who would sort of drop deep, but sort of drop deep centrally, whereas Gabriel Jesus is sort of going everywhere. He's peeling off to the wing. He's dropping deep, and those sort of spaces is allowing Martinelli, who previously was always quite like a high and wide sort of winger, always like used to quite hug the sidelines. And I think as an opposition team, you'd prefer him to be over there away from goal. But now he's sort of come into those central spaces where Jesus is peeling off to his position. And I think you sort of saw that in practice against Manchester United when they had that goal that was disallowed. I mean, the circumstances were a bit different because Manchester United got robbed of the ball when they were out of position, but it was Jesus was out on the right when they received the ball, and Martinelli sort of ran through the middle through that open space. It was obviously disallowed, but I think that's what you sort of saw that in practice. But yeah, Martinelli and Jesus, they're Arsenal's two top-rated players in the Premier League this season. I think Saka's fifth, so he's obviously still had a good season. But I do think many people probably thought that it would be Saka scoring most of the goals this season over Martinelli, but Martinelli has obviously sort of done that so far. But yeah, I just thought it's been an interesting change for him from going from being quite a high and wide winger to someone that's now playing centrally. And I do think that Gabriel Jesus has had a lot to do with that, with the sort of his natural movement.
Well, let's have our score predictions then, Jonathan. I'll come to you first. Brentford v Arsenal, score prediction, please.
1-1.
1-1. Josh, 6'4".
I'm going for 2-2.
2-2. I was going to go for 2-1 to Arsenal. Be a big win. They don't need to bounce back because they've had such a good start anyway for Arsenal, but I think it would be a good show of resilience after the Manchester United game if they went to Brentford, which is a really hard place to go and play, somewhere where they had a terrible time that last season. If they could go there and win, I think that would be absolutely huge for Arsenal and how they would feel about their season. Let's look now at Tottenham v Leicester, and we're going to start, Josh, by talking about Eric Dier's resurgence under Antonio Conte.
Yeah, I mean, the timing's not great because last night, I don't know if anyone saw the Marcus Edwards, that sort of Messi-like run he had from the halfway line where he sort of destroyed Eric Dier twice. But apart from that, I think Eric Dier's had a really consistent season. And I think in general, I think since Conte came in, he's been really consistent. I guess Conte sort of came in at the ideal time. Dier had sort of like a really poor run in terms of just like weird injuries. He was picking up injuries that weren't really football related. He had tonsillitis, appendicitis, sort of things like that kept him sidelined for a while. And then obviously he had that incident where he climbed into the crowd, lost his England place. It was a bit of a weird time for him. But I think Conte, who does place such an emphasis on having such an organised defence, and actually being able to do that, because obviously Mourinho puts a lot of emphasis on that as well, but this version of Mourinho isn't sort of capable of sort of executing it. But Conte obviously is. And I think he's even said that Eric Dier can become one of the best players in the world in that sort of middle position in a back three, because he has those leadership qualities, and he is sound because he obviously used to play in midfield or can play in midfield. So I do just think there's been a real level of consistency shown from Eric Dier, which is really a hallmark of what Conte's done with players who he's basically elevated a lot of players to a level where maybe we didn't think was possible. If you think of Victor Moses and Giaccherini, and I'm not putting Eric Dier into that sort of category of player, but he certainly has made him way more consistent. I think I looked into sort of the with without record with Eric Dier in the Premier League under Antonio Conte, and Tottenham have a win ratio of 64% in the Premier League when he has started, and he's only missed 3 games from the start, Eric Dier, but Tottenham have lost 2 of those. Goals conceded per game is just 0.7 when Eric Dier starts, compared to 2.33 when he doesn't start. So yeah, I think people probably thought that Eric Dier's England career was sort of over, probably even 6 months ago, to be honest. But I think now, yeah, he like, as we said at the top of the show, where there is a lot of problems with some of England's centre backs at the moment. Eric Dier does have a really good chance, I think, of getting into the squad tomorrow.
A huge player for Tottenham, Jonathan. I guess the biggest thing for them is if anything were to happen to Eric Dier, there's no one of the same ilk really to come in and play in the middle of that back three. So Eric Dier is arguably actually one of Tottenham's most important players.
You look at something like Romero, who sort of does have leadership qualities, but in a different way. He's not an organiser. He's sort of the attack dog you send out to win the ball in midfield. Or you look at Davinson Sanchez, who I think is actually, after a pretty ropey spell last season, has started to look decent again. So, yeah, what you said is true. There is nobody else in the Tottenham squad like him, and therefore he's very important.
Yeah, if anything were to happen to him, like you said, the defenders you've just mentioned, they're good defenders, but to be playing in the middle of that back three, you have to be a very specific type of player, and Dier probably offers most things that you need. I think he's probably a bit quicker than he gets credit for as well, Eric Dier. I think everyone looks at him as being quite lumbersome and quite slow, but I actually don't think he is that slow, and his distribution out from the back, as Josh touched on, is excellent. Let's look a little bit at Leicester then. Bad season so far, bad transfer window, bad everything. Everyone's unhappy. Rodgers is unhappy. The fans are unhappy. It looks like the players are unhappy. They're all arguing with each other. A little bit of a crisis at Leicester, Jonathan. Is this something that will damage Rodgers' reputation, or will he kind of get away with it because the club's such a mess anyway and he's got credit in the bank as a manager?
Look, if it's true that he wants to get out, and if it's true that he has sort of been trying to negotiate a payoff, then I completely get that from his point of view in terms of protecting his reputation. That if you leave early in the season, it can be portrayed as, what could you do? They'd lost Schmeichel, Vardy was coming to the end. There was no reinvestment. They lost Fofana. It was a terrible position to be in. If he lingers and the season carries on being as bad as it is, I think that does damage him. If you're a manager who's appearing on television every week trying to explain away another defeat, if people start to say, well, hang on, this issue of not being able to defend corners, how has he not put that right in 2 years? It doesn't really matter how good your defenders are. You should be able to organise them better than that. Then I think that does raise questions. I think that probably is if it is true he's trying to get out, what's behind that. However, on the other hand, if he sort of turns this around and gets them up to 13th, say, then I think you'd say, well, that's a brilliant job he's done. And this squad really, all else being equal, if morale was good, probably should be good enough to finish sort of 2/3 of the way down the table.
On one hand, you do have that sympathy for Rodgers because of the summer that they've had, which I guess isn't necessarily his fault. But then on the other hand, you think maybe they wouldn't be in that position had they not sort of bombed out of top four contention 2 years in a row. Which I guess you could say that they were overachieving to be in that position in the first place. But then once you're in that position and it's so favourable for you to finish in the top four, to then miss out, I don't think you can necessarily just overlook that as, you shouldn't have been in that position in the first place. So on that hand, then I don't feel sympathy for Rodgers. And then, like Jonathan said, when you sort of take away all the noise, they do still actually have a really good starting 11, a lot better than some of the other teams around them. So and the idea was that once the transfer window shut, then all the players would refocus, and they would just get on with it again. But they lost their next game 5-2 to Brighton, and that was after the window shut. So we'll have to see. But I do think the longer he does stay there, and if things don't improve, then it will be damaging, because it wasn't long ago he was linked as Solskjaer's replacement. Even when Tuchel was sacked, he was briefly linked as an idea, an alternative for Chelsea. And he's obviously regularly been sort of touted as Guardiola's long-term successor at City. But I think those go away I imagine they're certainly gone away now, but they would definitely not be in the sort of pipeline if he stays at Leicester for a while. And if it is the fact that he's not leaving because he knows he's got that huge sort of payout to come, then I don't think you can have any sympathy for him if he sticks around for as long as it takes. But yes, it's just such a difficult one for especially for Leicester fans. I mean, they've lost Kasper Schmeichel. I think they lost the players they would rather have not, and they've kept the players that they probably needed to move on. So yeah, it's a very, very difficult one. I think you've seen it. Pochettino at PSG, his reputation has sort of gone down. He's struggling to sort of be linked with these sort of jobs now, and he was at PSG. So I imagine the same sort of thing will happen with Rodgers at Leicester.
But it does show how quickly reputations change. That, say, Chelsea had sacked Tuchel at the end of last season, if Todd Bowley had said, right, clean slate, starting again, putting in my own man, who would have been higher on the shortlist, Graham Potter or Brendan Rodgers?
Fair.
Almost certainly Rodgers.
Yeah.
And now, 5 games later, suddenly, obviously it's Potter.
When you put it like that, that's really weird, isn't it? That's like,
yes, it is. That's why I said it.
Yeah, that's like a really valid point. It's so valid, it's killed the podcast. No one knows how to react off the back of it. Josh, you say about Rodgers and the payout, but then it probably works both ways because Leicester probably have wanted to sack him, but they won't because they don't want to pay the money. So it probably does work both ways in some respects. But the goalkeeper, Schmeichel was on the decline, but he's still a very good goalkeeper. Danny Ward, nowhere near the standard of Kasper Schmeichel, and has looked so shaky trying to replace him so far this season. They've lost Fofana. He's been replaced with Val's face. I can't even say his name. I can't remember his name. That's how well known he is. He might go on to be a very good player. That doesn't seem like an adequate replacement. They've got Tielemans who wants to go in midfield, but they're really kind of forced to play him at the moment. The players are fighting on the pitch. They don't look happy. Everything is just a mess. Are they gonna get a result at Spurs on the weekend?
Well, I thought initially I was going to predict this as 3-0 to Tottenham, because this should be a game where they're there for the taking, but Tottenham are just a really weird side as well. They just haven't, as we've said numerous times on this podcast, that they just look so lethargic and just so poor. So I'm not confident in that either, but I would be surprised if they didn't win. So I'm going to go for a 1-0 Tottenham win.
I am going to go 3-0 to Tottenham just because you were going to do it. Now I feel like because you were going to do it, it could be something I could take advantage of. So I am going to go 3-0 Tottenham. Jonathan, 2-0 to Tottenham.
Split the difference. To say 2-0.
The sensible way to play this game, even though we don't know what the league table is or anything, because Josh won't tell us. Have we got it, Josh? No.
It'll be after the international break. I just wanted there to be a nice sample size for us to bring it back.
Yeah, Martin used to do it weekly, didn't he? But Martin's not here anymore. You're a new man at the helm. Trying to put your own stamp on things, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly that.
Fair enough then. Let's look at Wolves against Manchester City. Diego Costa, Jonathan. Well, I'm not sure about this. I'm really not sure about it at all. He's joined Wolves. How do you feel about this one?
Well, I'm fascinated to see what he does. As a neutral, he's just somebody who's kind of quite amusing to watch. I hope he's still as angry as he used to be. It would disappoint me if age
be angry.
Off him. Well, hopefully. That's great. But he's only started 19 games in the last 20 months, which is, I'd say, non-ideal. But I do understand why Wolves want a focal point, and that's obviously why they brought in Kalajdzic. And the ACL injury, is incredibly bad luck, and he's 6'7". But I think Jimenez has not been the same sort of player that he was before the head injury. If you look at his headers on goal before the head injury, he had more headers on goal than anybody else in the Premier League. He's now down at 27th. Now that's totally understandable. You can't blame him for that. I don't even think it's necessarily an issue of courage. I think it's playing with that. The what do you call it? The helmet thing.
Yeah.
There's a couple of times when he sort of ripped it off after coming off, as if he feels he can't head the ball accurately anymore. So without meaning in any way to have a go at him, they've now lack the aerial threat he used to give them. And partly Wolves' crossing, they're not crossing as often as they were. And I don't know what's cause and effect there, whether they're not crossing as much because they don't have the aerial threat, or whether because Jimenez hasn't been as effective in the air, they've stopped crossing as much. So they were 9th in the list of most crosses per game, and they've dropped to 17th. So I completely get why they want a big bloke up front. And then when the bloke is meant to be that gets injured straight away, you have to take emergency measures. And I think if a choice is taking a punt on Diego Costa or bringing Andy Carroll, I know which one I'd go for, and it would be the Costa option. It may work, it may not. I sort of think it's one of those things where look, if it hasn't worked in 3 games, forget it. Go back to doing something else, and hope that either they bring in somebody who's played more regularly in January, or that Kalajdzic is on the mend and he can get back before the end of the season.
Yeah, I personally don't mind it, to be honest. I think that maybe that's easier to say as sort of like a neutral, but he was box office when he was at Chelsea. He was someone that you wanted to watch, whether he was going to completely bully a defence or he was going to fight every single player on the pitch. I do hope that's still the side that we get to see. And just on Jonathan saying, I hope he's still as angry. Since he left Chelsea in 2017, he's actually got more yellow cards than he scored goals. So I suspect we'll probably still see that side to him. But yeah, he hasn't played a game for 9 months. So it's going to take him a while to get sort of up to match fitness. But I think Wolves were just in such a difficult place, as Jonathan said, because Kleidic obviously suffered that season-ending injury on his debut, and the transfer window had shut. So they sort of were very limited in what they could do in that sense. And I think it just will hopefully help reduce the burden on Raul Jimenez. Maybe he does feel a sense of pressure, which isn't helping with his obvious and understandable lack of form. Before his head injury, he was averaging a goal every 203 minutes. And since the head injury, that's gone up to every 522 minutes. So Wolves, the way they play up until the penalty box, they're probably one of the best sides in the league. But it's as soon as they get into the penalty area where they really sort of struggle. And maybe they're sort of hoping that Ruben Neves can be what Cesc Fabregas was to Diego Costa when they're at Chelsea together, because that sort of partnership was incredible. And Ruben Neves does have that sort of range of passing in his locker, so maybe we'll see that. But yeah, I would be very surprised if we saw a very good Diego Costa. I imagine we will get to the end of the season and Wolves will say, yeah, it didn't work out, but I'm behind the decision to bring him back. I think it would be good entertainment.
Because you're saying it's box office. That's not what Wolves fans want. They want someone to put the ball in the back of the net. They've wanted a striker for so long. They must feel like they're absolutely jinxed in terms of strikers. Now with Jimenez picking up the bad injury he had, they buy a new striker. He picks up a bad injury straight away. They spent a serious amount of money on Fabio Silva and that didn't really work. And then at a time when they could probably do with him, they've sent him out on loan to get his confidence back. And now Costa coming in at 33, I think he is. You know, you think, Jonathan, about players who've come to the Premier League nearer the end of the career. You think of like Zlatan, for example, and then obviously Cristiano Ronaldo last season. They're physical specimens, aren't they? They look after themselves. Strikers of that age. Lewandowski's kind of the same. I don't get that vibe with Costa at all, and I really think this is going to be tough for him to just come back in and play in the Premier League after 9 months out.
Yeah, he's not going to be mobile. I think you can say that fairly clearly. I mean, he didn't score a huge number of goals at Atletico Mineiro either. Yeah, he got 4 goals in 9 starts and 6 sub appearances. It shouldn't work. Yeah, logic says it shouldn't work, but on the other hand, I see the logic in rolling the dice.
Yeah. Well, they had to do something, didn't they? It depends what money he's on, I guess. I don't imagine he's on the serious kind of wages he has been over the years.
I would assume it's some kind of pay-to-play deal. Or, yeah.
Is Mendes his agent by any chance?
Oh, it probably is now, yeah.
He's got a chance, hasn't he? I don't know off the top of my head whether he is, but he's probably got a chance. And yeah, this has got to work for Wolves, really, because like Josh says, they're very good until the penalty area, but Wolves could find themselves embroiled in a relegation battle, I think, if they don't sort out scoring goals, because they're very good defensively, but you're not going to get anywhere unless you can put the ball in the back of the net. And one thing that was good about Wolves this summer, Josh, is that they held on to Ruben Neves. Still hasn't managed to get that big move that he's probably, himself been looking for. What is it that stopped that from happening? At
times he has been not underwhelming, but he hasn't. I don't think he stood out an awful lot over any of other Wolves' midfielders. I think João Moutinho probably over the time has.
Moutinho's a class act. Moutinho's a class player.
Absolutely, and I think so. In that sense, it's not surprising. But if you told me 5 years ago, when Wolves managed to sign Ruben Neves in the Championship, that he would be at the club 5 years on, I would probably have laughed. But he has started this season really well, and I think what's been really sort of eye-catching for me, and as I said, maybe what they're hoping to get from Diego Costa is his range of passing this season. No player in the Premier League is actually averaging more accurate long balls per game than Ruben Neves, which is including goalkeepers as well, which is quite impressive. And it has been that range of passing to spread the play high and wide that has been really effective for Wolves, obviously, until they get in the area and they can't score. And he is also one of the top 10 central midfielders in the Premier League this season in terms of WhoScored rating. He's in there with the likes of Kevin De Bruyne, Martin Odegaard, Rodri, Ilkay Gundogan and Bernardo Silva, those sort of names. So he's in and around it. And I would be surprised if, I don't know, say Arsenal, Liverpool and United weren't linked with him again, as they always seem to be sort of at the end of the season. But yeah, it's a weird one. It's sort of like it hasn't been for a lack of trying either, I don't think. It does seem like his side of the sort of transfer have been sort of pushing for a move away. And I think he even said recently that he thought he was as good as gone this summer. But he does seem to have got his head down and focused. And I do think he has those sort of attributes where fans do really love him. He's not just a talented player, but he does have the passion and the work rate. And since he's taken the captain's armband on, I think he's really sort of risen to that sort of challenge, replacing Conor Cody. And I think he is a fan favourite at Wolves. So I'm not sort of advocating for clubs like I said, Toney to Manchester United earlier. I'm not sort of advocating for the smaller clubs to lose their sort of best players. But yeah, it does seem a bit weird that he's still there.
Well defended, Josh. Got yourself out of the hole that you got yourself in at the start of the podcast. Neves is he's a lovely footballer. Sorry, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a slightly strange category of player. And I guess you could put something like James Ward-Prowse, maybe Tielemans in a similar boat, where you look at them being really good for a mid-table team, and you sort of think, oh well, they're due a step up. But the problem is that by being so visible and so good at a mid-table Premier League team, their price gets to such a point that the big clubs sort of think, well, that's a lot of money to spend for somebody who might not be able to make that leap. And so they end up going for somebody from abroad who might be half the price, but has played Champions League, and you know they can do it at European level. And I think you do find that sort of player where you just sort of get stuck on a mezzanine between mid-table and the top six. And the fact that they've come to prominence in the Premier League means their price tag is so large that there's always a better option there. So they end up never quite moving on.
I think Tielemans and Neves have suffered from the same problem as in why they haven't got their moves, because undoubtedly the big six will have looked at those two players. I think it's mobility.
Yeah,
Either
possibly.
of them get around the pitch defensively that great for a central midfielder, and most teams play with two central midfielders. I think it's possibly mobility that's holding those two back.
It's interesting though, because from Manchester United's perspective, I would have seen a more logical train of thought going from who they were linked with in midfield to then Neves rather than going to Casemiro, for example.
Yeah, but it's that mobility, I think.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say Casemiro is particularly, from what we've seen of him so far defensively, he's looked really quite poor for United when he's come on in that sort of defensive role. But yeah, it's strange. I'm sure maybe he'll just be at Wolves for a long time, but we'll see.
Yeah. Another defensive midfielder. Well, another midfielder, Kalvin Phillips. Lots of problems with injury so far this season, Jonathan. But the Manchester City move, I've not been spoken about that much. What are your thoughts on it? You know, should he have gone there? Should he have wanted to test himself? Probably yes. But is he ever going to be in their best 11? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, at the minute, it's difficult to tell because of the injury. So yeah, it's very hard to know how much he would play were he fully fit. But at the moment, he appears very clearly second fiddle to Rodri. And I think, Kalvin Phillips is almost in that bracket of players we've just been talking about, like Ruben Neves and like Youri Tielemans and like James Ward-Prowse, where when they do make the step up, are they actually just going to be a backup? Are they just going to be a reserve? In which case, spending, 55 million, something like that?
Between 45 and 55, I think.
Is it worth spending that on a player who is essentially a reserve? But I mean, I think there's got to now be a doubt as to whether he'll be a starter for England come the World Cup. I think if he's not playing club minutes, I mean, who knows? He may get in the squad this week, be brilliant in training, have a couple of brilliant games, and suddenly this discussion seems absurd. But I think Southgate prefers to play players who are playing regularly, and that is an area. Well, certainly 6 months ago, an area where you'd saying them were pretty well stocked with Declan Rice, with Jordan Henderson, with Jude Bellingham, with Ward-Prowse even. Henderson hasn't started the season well and is now injured. Declan Rice hasn't started the season particularly well. Bellingham's playing regularly for Dortmund, but he is a more attacking player. So if the response to those poor Nations League games in June is to go to a more solid system and go back to that back three with the two sitting players, then I guess he does get in. But if he's not playing, that does make you a bit anxious about that.
England got problems in that area as well. Josh, really, as Jonathan's just alluded to. I think Conor Gallagher was perhaps coming through. He's not really playing.
He's a more attacking player, though. He's
I know. But
even more attacking than Bellingham.
So you're right. You're playing that system with the two sitters, like England, like Southgate will probably want to. It's Declan Rice and one other, but probably the only two players I can think of that could play that are Henderson, who he's just be struggling to get through 90 minutes of games at the moment, and Kalvin Phillips, who's spent a lot of time injured as well. I can't think of any left field shots to come in and play that.
And I don't think there's anybody else quite like him for his range and pace of forward passing. I think that's what Phillips gives you. And I think that's why he works really well with Rice, because Rice is somebody who's more inclined to get the ball and drive forward himself. So him alongside Phillips, I think, works really nicely. And so that goal against Croatia, the first game of the Euros, Phillips' role in that was enormous with the pace at which he got the ball forward. So, yeah, I really hope he does get minutes. He is fit because I think he's somebody who's very important to England.
Yeah.
I sort of alluded to it in our sort of pre-season show based all on Manchester City that I was a bit concerned for Phillips for his England spot, because we see that there is an adaptation period for quite a lot of the Manchester City players under Guardiola, and like in the short term, at least. In that long term, you would suspect that Phillips working under Guardiola for a length of time is only going to improve him as a footballer. So in that respect, England are going to benefit from that hugely. But in the short term, I didn't see him playing that much, to be honest, before the World Cup because of Rodri and the form that he'd shown last season. And that's obviously sort of been true so far. Obviously, injuries haven't helped Phillips, who does seem to have this weird shoulder problem that keeps sort of resurfacing every now and then. But he's one of quite a few of England's regulars that have been struggling. I sort of looked into the top 10 lowest rated England players of those that have been capped for England. And Kalvin Phillips is the third lowest of all those players. But in that sort of bottom 10, you have Luke Shaw, Harry Maguire, Emil Smith-Rowe and Conor Gallagher. And obviously part of that is that they've not played that much. But that in itself is the problem, isn't it? That they're not playing a lot of club football. But yeah, I suspect he will definitely go to Qatar because, as Jonathan said, England's midfield doesn't look so strong anymore. But I imagine there could well be a question of whether he is in the right sort of shape to sort of start these tournament games.
A lot of worries for Gareth Southgate, to be honest. I'm not feeling great about the World Cup from doing this podcast. Wolves v Man City, then predictions. I'll do mine first because I think that's only fair. I'll go Wolves 0, Manchester City 2. Josh?
I'm going to go for 2-0 as well. Erling Haaland will probably score both the goals.
Yep. And Jonathan?
3-1 to City.
3-1 to City. Wolves are going to put the ball in the back of the net, which will delight their fan base. We're going to finish with just a minute section, which is literally probably going to be about a minute because there's only so few games this weekend. Josh, you're at first with the big one. Friday night lights, Aston Villa against Southampton. Come on, the Villa.
It feels like a lifetime ago that Villa drew 1-1 with Manchester City. So in that sense, it's a shame for Steven Gerrard that they haven't been able to sort of carry on with any sort of momentum. Ashley Young will probably be the only change to the side that started that game. If it seems like Matty Cash is injured, he's been left out of Poland's squad because of the injury. So that would probably mean that the likes of Buendia and Coutinho are left on the bench once again, which is entirely fair, I think, based on the way that Villa played against City. As for Southampton, Livramento and Romeo Lavia, they're still unavailable. But deadline day signing Duya Cheleta-Char, I think I said that right. He'll be in the squad here with extra time to train. It's been a bit of a typical start to the season for Southampton. I think they had a really heavy defeat. They've beaten Chelsea from behind, so they've done a good performance there. Then they've got a couple of draws against teams they would probably expect to beat. So neither side are really consistent at the moment. So I guess it could go either way. Fixtures between the two at Villa Park, especially in recent years, have been very entertaining. I think let me see, is it the last 4 games at Villa Park between the two have averaged over 5 goals a game. So hopefully another thriller here. I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw.
1-1.
1-1. I'm going to go for 2-1 to Villa. Forest Fulham for you, Jonathan.
Yeah, Forest 3 straight defeats after that. Promising start, at least in terms of results, if not necessarily performances. 11 conceded in those games. And okay, 2 of those goals were against Spurs and 6 against City, which maybe is what you'd expect. But I think the way they capitulated in that second half against Bournemouth really is a concern. The fact they couldn't adjust to Bournemouth going to a back 3 and couldn't defend themselves against the attacks from the wing backs. A lot's been made of all the players they've brought in. They've already started with 19 players this season, which for 6 games is enormous. And you just worry that they won't be able to settle that down in time, and that they'll already be in a difficult position by the time Steve Cooper gets some sort of coherence there. Fulham have been much more impressive than last time they came up. 2 wins, 2 draws, 2 defeats. But those 2 defeats in the last 2 away games have been against Arsenal and Tottenham, maybe games we wouldn't expect to get much out of. And they played pretty well in both of those. Last season in the Championship, Fulham won this game 4-0, although Forest did win 1-0 at Craven Cottage. But I think Fulham will have too much this time. I'm saying 2-1 to Fulham.
2-0 to Fulham here. Josh?
2-1 to Fulham here. I think I sort of expected these two to sort of have the opposite starts to the season. But yeah, Fulham 2-1.
Me too. I confidently went on Sky Sports News and said Forest would definitely stay up, and since then I don't think they've won a game, so I'm having my usual effect on football. Newcastle v Bournemouth for you, Josh.
1 win in 6 isn't the sort of form that will get Newcastle into Europe this season, but they'll hope that welcoming back the likes of Bruno Guimaraes and Alan St-Maximin to face Bournemouth on Saturday will improve them. Alexander Isak as well will hope to build on a good debut for Newcastle after he scored against Liverpool. So you'd expect some improvements there if they can welcome back those two players. As for Bournemouth, Gary O'Neill's done well to sail the ship. I think it looked very bleak for Bournemouth after they lost 9-0 and then sacked Scott Parker, but he's followed that up with a draw against Wolves and a win over Nottingham Forest. I'm going to put maybe a bold shout out here. I think by this time next year, I think Lloyd Kelly will have got a cap for England. I think he's really important to Bournemouth, and I think that I can see him moving on in the summer, again advocating for clubs to lose their sort of best players. But yeah, I think he's one to watch out for in the future. These are the sorts of the games that Newcastle should sort of be winning without any sort of problem. So I'm going to go for 2-0 home win.
1-0 to Newcastle for me. Jonathan?
3-0 to Newcastle.
3-0 to Newcastle. And Josh Wright hates non-Big Six teams, wants to sell all their players off. Absolutely disgusting on the podcast this week.
We should just have franchise. It should be like the 100. We should have like 100-man squads at half a dozen teams based in Manchester.
Josh doesn't care for anyone but the top six. You think you wouldn't want them to join all the top six teams as well, because obviously that would affect the team that you support. Manchester United aren't going to sign everyone. Josh, stop it. Jonathan, Everton, West Ham to finish the pod.
There are two teams who've had disappointing starts of the season, but both I think have shown signs of improvement recently. Everton began with 2 defeats, 4 draws in the last 4 games, including that draw against Liverpool, when they could easily have nicked it. As usual, they've got a long list of injuries. Townsend, Godfrey, Mina, Pickford, all out. Doubts over Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Doucouré and Holgate. West Ham level on points with them, but below them on goal difference. They beat Villa, if that counts as an achievement. Have lost 3 times, and then they got a draw against Spurs where they played pretty well. So the last 2 games have actually been a lot better. They were unlucky to lose at Chelsea last time out with that VAR decision, really cancelling out Cornet's last-minute equaliser. Aguerd and Johnson out for them. There's doubts over Cresswell, Souček and Cornet. Last season, West Ham won twice against Everton, 1-0 at Goodison, 2-1 at London Stadium. But I think it might be tighter this time. I'm going to say 1-1.
I'm going to go for 2-1 to West Ham, and I'm going to say Anthony Gordon's going to Tottenham next summer. No, I'm just joking. No, Everton to lose 2-1.
I've got a clue what to predict for this one. I think Pickford being out is a big blow for Everton, but then West Ham have been poor so far this season. I'll go for a 2-2, I think. And Jonathan, less of the slander against Aston Villa. West Ham beat Villa, but Villa have drawn with Manchester City since, so it looks a better result than it did at the time now. That does us for this week's iteration of the Edge of the Box podcast. Don't forget to subscribe with your post notifications on so you know exactly when our next video is coming out. Thanks ever so much for watching. Thanks to Jonathan and Josh. Stay safe.